Hello everyone, my name is Boulevard, and while we exist in this weird limbo space as we're all very excited and waiting for the Heart of Huntress expansion to drop, I want to give Eternal sort of a proper send-off. So today I want to look at the top 8s of each region's each open, so 6 top 8s in total, kind of tell you what changed from Open 1 to Open 2 despite no balance changes or anything along those lines, and kind of talk about what the impact of the balance patch that happened going into the Eternal format. What was a hit, what was a miss, things like that, just so that we all have a good idea of what happened. That's like 10% of it. The other 90% is so that a year from now when people misremember the format, I can dunk on them for being wrong and I have video evidence to back it up. That's mostly what we're doing here, I'm going to be honest with you. So very quickly, I want to go over patch 4.5, talk about the hits, the misses. First off, loaded dice, this was a total miss. I don't even think a deck was attempted with this anywhere near towards the top of the competitive meta. The Celestial spells not needing to behold anymore actually was quite impactful, and while Aphelios Victor and decks like it were really the only ones that we saw playing with anything like this, we didn't get like dedicated Invoke decks back, I do want to point out that Star Shaping was the only Invoke card that a lot of those lists were running, so the ability to just rip Supernova or Cosmic Inspiration without needing to find the second copy of Star Shaping in order to turn them on was an absolute huge difference maker. And I played a lot of Aphelios Victor. I definitely felt the impact of Cosmic Inspiration and Supernova. Cosmic Rays, I don't think obviously being changed to not need to behold was better, but Cosmic Rays just didn't really fit in the format. I never found myself going for this one. If I was playing against aggro and I was resolving a Star Shaping, like generally it was going to be a couple of turns before I could even try to cast Cosmic Rays because I just didn't have the spell mana bank, because aggro kind of keeps you on the back foot in that way. But Supernova against mid-range, Cosmic Inspiration against pretty much everything, these all felt absolutely fantastic. A+ on that one. Crimson Aristocrat, I saw a couple of people like trying this out, but ultimately it didn't end up sticking. I'd call this one like a B or a C, somewhere along those lines. Pix was actually like, this card had some decks appear in top 8s of the Open that it could have been in. Lulu Poppy, a couple of Zed variants popped up in top 64, but I don't even... So I know the ones that top 8'd weren't running picks. I didn't go back and check if the top 64 Zed list was running picks, but ultimately I'm also going to give this one a C, because mostly because like I don't know if it appeared in the one deck, but I just don't think this is what the Ionia aggressive archetypes are really looking for right now. Similarly, Twin Discipline, I was surprised by this one. Also did not appear in any of the Ionia aggro decks that I got to take a look at, certainly none of the ones that went to the top 8 of the Opens, and ultimately I was a little bit afraid of this one, right? We all remember how powerful 3-attack Twin Discipline was, and it just didn't really hit where it needed to, and I think that's more of a meta thing than a Twin Discipline thing. So this is one that I'm still scared of. This is one that I will definitely be looking at again once we get our next Eternal format in a couple of months, but for now, it was pretty middle of the road, about a C. Eminent Benefactor, F-, nobody even attempted. Same thing with Captive Yeti, reputation just ain't there yet. Sanctum Conservator, this is more of a meme card, and sort of the same thing with Captive Yeti, and to a lesser extent Eminent Benefactor, well, probably to a greater extent Eminent Benefactor. I just don't think these cards were changed for the competitive scene, and that's fine. And, maybe it would have been cool if Sanctum Conservator was a competitively viable card, and, giving it the ability to kill a follower on sight, but ultimately it didn't matter. This was huge. Draven back to 3-3. Reddit and Twitter have been memeing about this and begging for it forever. And you saw a lot of... The way that I classify the archetype was Scion, in quotes, because Draven was always present, but whether Samira or Scion was the secondary or tertiary or non-existent within the archetype was always a little up in the air. And then, of course, you also had a little bit of discard aggro make a comeback, the classic Jinx Draven. We had some Draven Samira burn. I'm sure other players experimented with Draven in a cooler way, but ultimately, Draven did have a big meta impact. Withering Wail, while Shadow Isle control did not come back as big as people might have expected it to, we didn't go back to a Nivy or anything like that, Karma Set Shadow Isle did end up overtaking Karma Set Piltover and Zaun at just about every turn, and so I think that was largely due to Withering Wail, having that board wipe, whereas PNZ has the Caustic Riff at the same cost, I might remind you, without flow active. Withering Wail and Caustic Riff for the same amount of mana. So I think that was actually a huge plus for Shadow Isle Karma, on top of, obviously, like, they got Vile Feast back, but, stringing together multiple pings, like on turn 4, you go Vile Feast plus Withering Wail. That's like 2 damage to the board, 4 damage to 1 unit. It's looking pretty good. Withering Wail, B+. Concurrent Timelines. I know we're only scaling on, like, grading system A to F, but this is actually S. This was so terrifying. that they had to hotfix nerf it, revert it back to 2 mana, and it still appeared as the most played deck in the top 8 of the second open. And so I think it is safe to say that we will never attempt this again. I do like the team's experimentation and willingness to push the boundaries. It was a little funky that we had to pull it back the week of the first open, and I'll talk a little bit more about the impact there, but I do want to say that, like, we can't do this again. We cannot. This is the one thing we don't touch again. Poppy to a 3/3. Probably not as impactful as people thought it was going to be. There were a couple of Poppy decks, but while Ziggs Poppy really took over ladder on day one, Ziggs Poppy didn't have lasting power within the meta, and even when you look at triple aggro lineups, they're usually not running a Poppy deck. It was just a little bit too fringe, and I think 4/3 Poppy would have been way overtuned, mostly just because a 4/3 for 4, pretty good stat line, regardless of whether or not you have a board. So, yeah, I think Poppy was, like, you know, a little bit of a miss meta-wise, but I think had we gotten another 1 or 2 weeks in the meta, we really started to see mid-range Demacia picking up more and more, and perhaps Poppy would have just skyrocketed more. So I think the full potential of 3/3 Poppy wasn't realized here, and I do like that the attempt was made, because this is another one of those cards where, like, Poppy was so dominant for so long. One of the best champions released in Legends of Runeterra had to get nerfed so many different times in so many different ways that I do love the team's ability to just, like, hey, let's push the boundary a little bit, see what we can get away with, see what we can't. Mind Stoke Henchman, I didn't even know this card got changed. It doesn't matter. Really wasn't for the comp scene. Probably the same thing with Wise Fry. Just not really what you want out of a 6-mana unit, especially in Bilgewater, where, like, Bilgewater's place in the meta is a little awkward. It's a lot more combo-oriented, especially in Eternal. Wise Fry was just never going to fit the bill on that. I don't care how many stats you give him. Grand Plaza, I was a little surprised not to see come up as often. It was obviously experimented with a little bit earlier on in the meta, mostly scouts, a couple of Poppy decks, you know, a few very brave souls going back to the Lucian Hecarim archetype of old. But it just didn't really have staying power. I know Gwen Quinn was something that a lot of players were looking at, like, oh yeah, you know, we can jam Grand Plaza into that and it's all going to be hunky-dory. I think the tempo loss at this point, the format's just a little bit too fast for something like Grand Plaza. And when I look back at the Grand Plaza meta, the one deck that I remember doing very well was, it was like mid-range Targon Grand Plaza, and I think you even ran like Aurelion Soul, or at least I ran Aurelion Soul. And the only reason I remember that is because that is the one time I played in a fight night, was during the Grand Plaza meta. And so that's kind of what I remember about it, and it was for slower decks. It wasn't for these fast, aggressive decks. Like, obviously, Lucian Hecarim existed, but that wasn't really, like, that good of a deck. It was very polarizing, as ephemerals always tend to be, but ultimately, yeah, I was a little surprised that Grand Plaza didn't have a bigger impact. And again, maybe if we were moving more towards a mid-range Demacia style, then this would have had more impact, but it really looks like the other Demacia landmark was actually the more impactful one, making it, I believe, all the way to the finals of one of the top 8. So, yeah, Grand Plaza, a little bit of a whiff. Captain Eureka actually did pretty good. And this, I believe, is a standard change as well. So, excited to see what Captain Eureka can do in standard, because there were a couple of people, you know, playing the mid-range Demacia style decks, like the Scout style decks, and they're looking at, you know, we used to do either Genevieve Elmhart or Cytherea the Bold, or a mix of the two, and some players just started going for Captain Eureka, saying with Spell Shield and a 4/4 body, a lot of decks actually aren't getting through that, and you're just never going to get your unit or your landmark back. And, you know, I think there is another world where if we stuck with Seraphine bar builds, that Captain Eureka would have been a huge pushing point for mid-range Demacia continuing to take over that archetype in the matchup charts. And we didn't quite get there, but I do think that the Captain Eureka buff was sound. It was helpful. It saw play, which is more than I can say for a lot of these other cards, like On Guard, that you see poking out of the bottom of your screen. But ultimately, I like the Captain Eureka buff, and I'm very excited to see what this card does going forward as well. Out of the way was nothing. Iceborne Legacy, in the first grassroots tournament that we had, the Mastering Runeterra Open, we saw, or maybe it was Cash's event. I think it was Cash's event. I don't think it made it to the Mastering Runeterra Open. Yeah. It was Cash's event, like week 1 or week 2 or something along those lines. We got Iceborne Spiders back into Top Cut, and I think in a much slower meta, Iceborne Legacy will come back. I'd like to see them not push this one any further. I don't want to see a revert of this to burst speed. I think Iceborne Legacy's in a good spot, a playable spot, and I think it's just a meta call at the moment. I think the format's a little bit too fast. You've got a lot of aggro, or you've got the Seraphine decks where, like, they're not aggro, but they are faster than Iceborne Legacy is. And so I think if the format slows down a lot, which it's always kind of hard to know when Eternal formats are going to slow down a lot, you know, especially as we're doing buffs like this where we're pushing back, like we're just elevating the power level of it. Yeah, maybe Iceborne Legacy does either need to go down to like 4 mana or go back to burst speed in order to compete, but yeah, it just didn't really do it. Escaped Abomination might have been the biggest bait, where Thresh Nasus came out of the woodwork swinging, doing its best, and ultimately just completely fell off by the time we actually got into the weeds of the competition. In Eternal Open 1 and Eternal Open 2, Shadow Isle aggro or aggressive Shadow Isle strategies, like, Teemo at least came out, right? That was like an aggro Shadow Isle deck. Obviously did not play Escaped Abomination. The Nasus decks are really what we were looking for this in, and they just couldn't hold up to everything else. The format was, I think, just a little bit too fast for it. Like, Nasus coming down on 6 is the kill turn for a lot of decks. And yeah, obviously, if you can go wide on board, then you can slow down that turn timer a little bit, maybe take it in the late game a little bit harder, but that's just not what Escaped Abomination ended up doing. Blessing of Targon, this was very good. This card specifically didn't see play, but Targon Telstone saw a lot of play, specifically because of the changes to Telstones recently, where, you know, now Hush is in it, and now going back into Eternal, when we get, like, Felios and Zoe back, we actually have playable Targon strategies, and I found myself actually going for the Blessing of Targon a lot, and I think any elusive player, especially, like, Floppy Mudkip, you know, won the second Eternal Open in the Americas with elusives, will tell you that Blessing of Targons came up more than a couple of times, and then Kinku Lifeblade, absolutely nothing. As for the nerfs, like, you know, these were more standard aimed, I would say, and Samira obviously still took over in the Eternal format. Tristana really got a second wind in the second Eternal Open. Not Bandle Gunners, but Tristana certainly did, and we saw a lot of Tristana atrocities start to pick things back up. So curious how this affects Standard, because honestly I haven't looked at it in a minute, so I'm excited to see when the new set drops how that all plays out. And then Powder Pandemonium just continuing to take down the power level of Samira Fizz, which we saw a very sparing amount of in Eternal, but I think as the weeks went on, players really shifted more towards the Samira Draven burn. And that Mimic and Momentous Choice and yeah, whatever. This was nothing. This was something. So that actually took a lot longer than I thought. I thought that was going to be like a 2-3 minute segment, and it turned into 10, so I apologize for the length of this video, because I do still have more to say. So I made a Reddit post about the global top 64 comparing the two opens, and I'm going to show you this for the top 64, and then I'm going to get into the top 8s of each region and each Eternal format open. So I just kind of want to highlight real quick, we're just going to blitz through this. This is the global top 64. The criteria for a deck to make it onto the chart was it had to have at least 3 pilots in the top 64 of a single region. Otherwise, this chart would have gotten really long with like 2-ofs and 1-ofs. And you can see down here like how many of each deck was represented. So in Open 1, 502 of the 576 decks fit that criteria, 519 out of 576. And what that really just means is more 1-ofs and 2-ofs happened in Eternal Open 1 than Eternal Open 2. And I actually did have my math off here, I noticed a little bit later on, because there actually was one other Seraphine pile in the top 64 of Open 2, so this actually should be 520 out of 576, but it doesn't look like I can go back and edit this post anymore because it's a week old. So, just obviously, like, Plaza Guardian came out very strong in Open 1, remained dominant in Open 2. Jax Ornn had a huge fall-off as timelines swung things back in their favor, and I think this really was just a result of timelines getting hotfix nerfed the same week as Open 1, and then once we got a little bit more time to test, instead of like knee-jerk, oh shit, I can't play timelines anymore, everybody kind of got another week to test with it and go, oh yeah, never mind, this is still very powerful, and so we adjusted accordingly. Conservatory had a fall off, which makes sense. The format's speeding up. We're getting more Plaza Guardian. Rise took a win in one of the opens in the Americas, so that's going to scare people off of the hard control a little bit more. Pirates went down as aggro started to kind of decline. Karmastet, again, like Scion goes down, Annie Jin goes down, Elusives go down. Condensed Shelly is such a weird one where like Europe owns Condensed Shelly. And most of Conservatory is also Europe, and you'll see that when we get to the top 8s. Rise took a big spike, probably mostly due to Tyguy's win. Ziggs Poppy went down. Tristana Atrocity had a meteoric rise as well, and this is one that I still haven't really been able to like nail down and articulate exactly what happened between these two, because I mentioned in the Tournament Tactician going into Open 2 that Tristana Atrocity actually looked like a massive bait, where I think like 10 of these were in Europe's top 64, and then like 7 of them lost in top 64, and then another 2 lost in top 32, and like 1 went as far as the top 16. So to see this massive turnaround is something that I just never really got into the weeds of, and it's something that I'm very curious about. If you do have insight onto this and you want to comment below and let me know, like, I am genuinely interested in what the hell happened that we get this. And I'm sure it was just like a good matchup. Like, it could have been something as simple as a good matchup into one of the top decks, you know, like we're all expecting like we know that Timelines is coming again. Tristana Atra does very well into Timelines. Something to that effect is probably what it was. And then there's nothing else like super interesting. Teemo at least gets a giant jump. Seraphine piles take a hard fall off. Like I mentioned, this should be a 1, but still other Seraphine piles take a huge fall off as we all sort of learn how broken Plaza Guardian is. And Freljord, oh, sorry, that's Shen Jarvan. Where's the... It doesn't matter. Freljord Jarvan Vayne, like, stayed the same as well. But, yeah, so that's differences in top 64s. When we look at top 8s, this is what I was talking about. So if we control F, condense Shelly. So these are the top 8s from Open 1, and then these are the top 8s from Open 2. I spelled condense wrong. So you'll see that in Open 1, there were 3 condensed Shelly in the top 8, and all of them were in Europe. And then here, we again get 2 condensed Shelly in the top 8, and again, they are both in Europe. I don't know what it is about the European meta, where this is what they were, like, they just loved it. They loved it. They were the only representatives for this. And then when we look at Conservatory, again, like, it's 3 in EMEA, 2 in APAC, none in the Americas, and then when we get to Open 2, it's just, again, 2 in EMEA, and we actually finally get a win out of EMEAs with Conservatory, thanks to Jersey No, and that's a regional difference that I'm very interested in, and something that I'm going to try to keep in mind play stylistically when we start to get closer to the World Championship. I'm never really going to be able to predict when EMEA is going to go off script like this, but it is something that I want to highlight because I think it is a really cool thing, and, you know, one of the reasons that people would love more international competitions than just the yearly World Championship. You know, maybe like an MSI for Legends of Runeterra. Obviously, like, that's kind of an expensive endeavor. It's very show matchy, almost certainly not going to happen, but in a perfect world, I would absolutely love something like that. Maybe, you know, I was going to say we could organize something like it, but we don't have Crossshard, and we're not getting Crossshard back. So that's the one thing I wanted to highlight. The other one is when we look at the winners. So, winner 1, Plaza Guardian. Triple timelines, Plaza Guardian. Double timelines, Plaza Guardian, Plaza Guardian. So the one thing that I just kind of want to point out here, and I should actually expand these so that you can see them, I kind of impromptu made this tab, is that every event was either won by Plaza Guardian or at least 2 timelines decks, and I think there is a takeaway to come from that. It's a little bit more messy when we get into, you know, sort of what else won. Like, we actually had Shadow Isle win all 3 second opens, like Teemo, Elise, Aggro, Tristana, Atrocity, and Tristana, Atrocity. Don't mind the difference in naming conventions, I just never got around to fixing it. But Tristana, Atrocity, like, taking 2 of the wins in the second one, and then, like, double timelines being a little bit more... And, like, double timelines took second place as well in the second one. Triple elusives, then we get elusives win here. But sort of the main things that I wanted to highlight, the things that I thought were kind of cool, were every event was either won by Plaza Guardian or double timelines, and in one case, triple timelines. And we also got, you know, all like EMEA going so off script, like I said, with all of the condensed Shellies and all of the conservatories. Aggro had a pretty bad fall off, and I kept, you know, we went to Open 1. I said aggro is probably not as strong as people think it is. I think a lot of people got hope, especially when, like, your average Americas player is probably only watching the Americas, maybe watching EMEA as well, but I would assume, like, just paying attention to the Americas, and when, oh, yeah, like, you know, Cup is Mine got second place with aggro, I can go ahead and run that back. But when we actually look at, like, the breakdown of these two of these, let me, like, just control F some popular aggro decks, you know, 6 Pirates in top 8 of the first Open versus 1 Pirates in the top 8 of the second one, and that was an APAC. That wasn't, like, AM dropped it off. I don't believe Annie Jin ever made top... Okay, there was a little bit of Annie Jin in the first Open, no Annie Jin in the second Open. I hope that the colors are dark enough that you can see those. I don't think I can actually change the highlight colors, unfortunately, but 3 Annie Jin here in Open 1, 0 Annie Jin in Open 2. Poppy, yeah, we get like 2 Ziggs Poppy in the first Open, and then here we switch to Zoe Poppy and Lulu Poppy, so going for more, you know, sort of mid-rangey Demacia style of Poppy rather than Bandle City Burn Poppy. So, you know, just another one of those things where I think people really got baited into thinking... Now, the one exception, I think, was Teemo Elise. Yeah, no Teemo Elise here, and then we get, finally, like, Teemo Elise wins. Teemo Elise gets, like, second place here. But the one thing I want to point out is that, like, aggro didn't win any of these. Triple aggro got second place in one of them. You know, Cup is Mine coming in with the triple aggro. JO1 coming in with, like, double aggro-ish, if you want to classify Scion as aggro. It does have as much burn in it now that, like, maybe you could, maybe you don't. Typically, if it's paired with 2 other aggro decks, and there's, like, Scion as the third deck, I'll call that a triple aggro lineup, but I'm not going to classify Scion baseline as an aggro deck. But it was, like, Jack Sorn and then double aggro. You know, this was, like, very different. Triple timelines, and then, like, your very standard lineup. Over here, we've got, like, elusives, and then, like, Karma Set takes second place is the one difference between the 2 lineups of these players. over here, like Vayne, this was like the triple mid-range Demacia that I was talking about with like Jax Quinn, Lulu Poppy, Vayne, and then it just loses to like Plaza Guardian, Teemo Tristana, and Conservatory. So yeah, that is sort of the differences here. And again, if you just want to dive into this a little bit more yourself, because I don't want to turn this into like a 40-minute disposition. This is just something to kind of bide your time while we wait for the new expansion. I'm going to say goodbye to Eternal, and I implore you to, dig a little bit more into this yourself if you are interested in sort of learning some trends that happen between Open 1 and Open 2. If you ever think we're going to get an event that back-to-back, and we might later on in the year, because it seems like the last chance qualifiers for the World Championship are going to be very close in physical time towards the World Championship. I wouldn't be surprised if there's no change from the LCQ meta to the World's meta, and so this is something that you're going to want to go back and look at to understand trends in the meta, and it's something I'll probably talk about more, in December when we get closer to that. But for now, thank you so much for watching. I have been Boulevard. Hopefully you enjoyed this on your lunch break while you're eagerly anticipating more spoilers or something along those lines from the new expansion, and once that drops, I will be happy to stop talking about Eternal and get back into Standard with the new set. So thank you so much for watching. I've been Boulevard, and as always, good luck in your tournaments.